After you have added UTM parameters to your links, the next step is to check them in Google Analytics reports. And in fact, there are multiple places where you can do that. For example, you can go to the user acquisition report, and there will be a dimension that you will need to select, which is called first user source. By the way, keep in mind that sidebar in the reports section is highly customizable, so the location of this report in your property might differ. But what is important is that you should be looking for a user acquisition report. Another location is the traffic acquisition report. Here, if you don't see that dimension, you will need to select in the dropdown session source. And then one more place where you can find that is if you go to advertising, for example, then go to key event performance, and then here you can select a source dimension. So as you have noticed, all those dimensions contain the word source, but they also differ in their names. One dimension starts with first user, the other one starts with session, and then we just have source. So the question that you might have is which one to choose. Well, those dimensions serve different purposes. Let me explain. If you look at the report which is using first user source, then here's how it will attribute sessions and conversions. Let's say that we have a user who landed on our website for the first time from Google organic search, and I highlighted in green the source value, which is UTM source. Then the next day, the user came back from our newsletter. And then on the third day, the user came back from a paid Facebook ad. Also on that third session, the user made a purchase. So let's see how the first user source will attribute these sessions. If you see a dimension that starts with the word first user, it will always care only about the very first session of the user. In other words, this is the session that kind of acquired the visitor. So in the user acquisition report or any other report which is using first user source, then the report will show that Google got 3 sessions and 1 purchase. If you are familiar with attribution models in the older version of Google Analytics, then this is somewhat close to the first click attribution. Then if your report is using session source dimension or any other dimension that starts with the word session, then the report would look like this. 1 session is attributed to Google, then 1 to newsletter, and 1 session was attributed to Facebook.com, plus that purchase was attributed to the latest session. In this case, session source cares not only about the first session of the user, but actually about all sessions. And it checks each session's traffic source and displays them individually in the report. Most marketers who want to see where their traffic is coming from and the sources of those sessions, usually they use reports where the dimension starts with the word session. In other words, they will spend most of their time in the report that is called traffic acquisition.
By the way, I release Google Analytics or Google Tag Manager tutorials every week. If you want consistent flow of fresh knowledge and to stay up to date, then subscribe to this channel. It will help us a lot.
And then we have the third dimension, which is source. Now, the attribution here depends on what kind of attribution model are you using. If you go to the admin panel of your Google Analytics for property, then go to events and attribution settings, here by default, you should see the data-driven attribution. So if you also have this in your property, then the source dimension could display the following data. It might attribute the entire purchase to Facebook.com, but also it might decide to split that purchase or that conversion across multiple traffic sources. So as an example, the report could look like this. 1.8 of the purchase was attributed to the Facebook.com because maybe in this case, data-driven attribution thought that Facebook was the most important step in this user journey. And then it is also possible that the previous 2 sessions will also get a little bit of credit for that purchase. But what you should notice is that I don't have the sessions metric here, because when you're working with dimensions such as source, medium, or other dimensions where there is no first user or session words in those dimension names, in those cases, sessions are not attributed. Only key events and conversions are attributed. But I want to emphasize that in this case, when we are talking about the data-driven attribution, numbers in your property would be different because in each property, the algorithm might work a bit differently because of the data that they have collected, and that data in those properties is different. But if, on the other hand, your property is using the last click attribution model instead of data-driven, then source dimension right here and session source right here should show similar numbers. because session source is using last-click attribution. And this is pretty much it. If you found this video useful, then hit the like button below the video. That will help me understand what videos do you like and what should I create in the future. Also, if you want to learn more about Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics, then consider subscribing to this channel. My name is Julius, this is Analytics Mania, and I'll see you in the next video.